The Lighthouse is about many different things, including, but not limited to, identity, isolation, addiction, redemption, toxic masculinity, and class inequality during the Gilded Age, and enlightenment, specifically the Enlightenment. The 100 plus years from the late 17th century to the early 19th that focused on reason, truth, justice, and freedom. My last video was a deep dive into writer-director Robert Eggers, what makes him tick, and what drives him to keep making such original movies. I consumed scores of hours of Eggers' content before whittling it down to 17 minutes. Because of that, I think I have a special perspective on his 2019 folklore horror hit. Eggers doesn't like to, but admits that artists' deep-seated subconscious and maybe even unconscious thoughts can bubble up into their work.
I understand that there's certain things that I'm showing about myself, even though I'm trying to not show anything about myself.
And I believe that's exactly what happened. The Lighthouse shows Eggers' possibly unacknowledged resentment toward the Enlightenment for destroying humanity's supernaturalism and sense of meaning. The movie began as a simple ghost story in a lighthouse, based on Edgar Allan Poe's last but unfinished work.
With my brother and I, when we had a semblance of a story, finally we kind of said, all right, well, what myths or fairy tales or folk tales does this most closely resemble that we accidentally reconjured? Now let's go back and to those myths and kind of tease those motifs out more heavily.
They then went back and purposely obscured the screenplay to make it more enigmatic.
We kind of, had to know what the narrative was and then, destroy it to make it, deliberately confusing and maddening.
After all that, Eggers isn't even sure himself what it's really about.
Believing leads, but can lead to madness.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely. And that's...
Well, that's what The Witch is about.
Well, sure. And I think, that's certainly what The Lighthouse is about.
Yeah.
And whatever that's about.
Almost like it's a multi-million-dollar art therapy project, allowing the artist, an auteur in this case, to understand and work out deeply held issues. I find everyday life boring. The idea of medieval craftsmen are doing it for God is an appealing one to me. Having a religious system where the gods are multifaceted and you're also having to embrace darkness and death probably makes more sense than how we're living. Try to keep this in mind as we'll return to it later. Because of all the identity issues in the film, I'm simply going to call the characters by the actors' names. The older Willem Dafoe naturally symbolizes the older pre-enlightenment world. Rigid hierarchy.
Don't concern yourself with the bacon, lad. Mine! The light is mine.
Divine authority.
Manual says my log is the only book on this rock. And you're making eye marks in me logbook. Them's gospel.
Unchallenged tyranny.
And you'll be swabbing it 10 times more after that.
Intolerance.
Tis begrimed and bedabbled.
I already says...
How dare ye contradict me, you dog?
And unwavering supernaturalism.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Why is it bad luck to kill a gull?
In them's the souls of sailors, what met their maker.
The younger Robert Pattinson, as the most skeptical character in any Eggers film to date,
Tall tales.
represents the Big E Enlightenment-inspired younger world that turned away from anything that couldn't be observed. Basically religion, myth, and superstition.
More tall tales.
He's also individualistic.
Sometime soon I'll raise my own roof. Somewhere up country. No one to tell me what for.
Curious. And relatively tolerant. All prominent traits of enlightened thought. Even in the script, their names are just old and young. And their dialects too represent older and younger forms of grammar.
That's the trouble with you. That's the trouble with ye. With you! With ye! You!
The Principia Mathematica is often thought to have sparked the Enlightenment proper, for it demystified the world, possibly more than any other publication. It was the first flashlight into the darkness, if you will, explaining some of the fundamental forces of the universe. But what it implied was even greater. The universe could be understood by mere mortals. The fog of dogma and superstition could be cleared with reason and empiricism. Alexander Pope, the English Enlightenment poet, summed it up well. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. The Enlightenment's pursuit of knowledge is on clear display in this contemporary painting. Faces are alight in awe and wonder, emotions previously reserved for spiritual experiences. They are literally lit up by learning. Even the word literal, stemming from the 14th century, was created to oppose mystical and metaphorical ideas that were often used for theistic purposes. I've used the word light a lot. A lighthouse literally illuminates the darkness. The ideas of mental illumination for learning and lighting something on fire go back to ancient times. What to this day represents a new idea, an enlightened thought, if you will? Edison's light bulb. The same holds true conversely for darkness, which represents concealment, misunderstanding, and literal and metaphorical blindness. Denis Diderot created possibly the greatest intellectual work of the Enlightenment proper, the Encyclopédie. Please excuse my butchering of the French and Latin languages, by the way. It was a collection of the entirety of human knowledge that he could get his hands on, that took over 2 decades to compile. His most famous quote sums up the more radical Enlightenment thinking. Men will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest.
Now I'm free. Now I'm free from your designs!
That gives some idea of what Enlightenment thinkers were trying to move beyond, and the way to get there, through skepticism, was, he said, the first step towards truth.
Tall tales.
In the Lighthouse script, Dafoe whispers veritas in the presence of the light, which is Latin for truth. And in a line deleted from the final confrontation, he says to Pattinson, "I make the truth as I see fit," which sounds like something a pre-enlightenment authoritarian monarch might have said. This mysterious island is surrounded by the fog, as it were, of superstition, but the light of knowledge and learning, truth, is able to pierce through. Access to the light, however, is fiercely guarded by the tyrannical god of the island, for lowly humans cannot be trusted with it. By the end, we see that the Enlightenment worldview has essentially conquered the old one and destroyed its god, but not without consequences. Dafoe utterly respects the light, never touching it, but Pattinson does so as soon as he's able. It promptly overwhelms him, and he's punished for his defiance. We are all living, pardon the pun, in the wake of the Enlightenment. At hearing the news that the old god is dead, we philosophers and free spirits feel illuminated by a new dawn. It took several decades for it to trickle down through society, so its implications could not be fully felt until the late 19th century, when Max Weber and Friedrich Nietzsche did most of their writing, and not coincidentally when The Lighthouse takes place, which is Eggers' only post-Enlightenment movie so far, forcing him to grapple with a true skeptic.
He believed that there was some enchantment in the light.
No, it was actually disenchantment, so to speak, and they both placed the death of God, or disenchantment, squarely at the feet of the Enlightenment. Our times are characterized by rationalization and intellectualization, and above all, by the disenchantment of the world. You see what it was that really triumphed over the Christian God. The concept of truthfulness that was understood ever more rigorously, the refinement of the Christian conscience into a scientific conscience, into intellectual cleanliness at any price. That price for destroying mankind's subservience to the gods was predicted by Nietzsche and is what Robert Eggers now laments. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come differently, the advent of nihilism.
What is it in the 21st century that draws you to old myth?
Probably the commercial, secular, nihilistic worldview that we live in, and sort of being reactionary against that.
I don't know what you mean.
There's not a lot of magic and mystery.
The world's processes lose magical significance and henceforth no longer signify anything. Eggers longs for a world, and maybe we all do, with clearly defined morality, swift justice, and meaning.
Living in a religious or mythological system where every single thing around you is imbued with significance is appealing to me.
But that significance goes out the door when Pattinson supplants the no longer needed gods. He couldn't recite Dafoe's toast earlier.
To relief.
But now that he's usurped the god of the island, the role is his.
Spare death and triple dread. Deign to save a suppliant soul.
In other words, we have become our own gods. This is hammered home in the script, where it specifically says to exclude any buildings from the final shot. As if this world's Mount Olympus, the Lighthouse, is now gone. It's just us. It's now our world. Proteus and Prometheus, in essence the film's protagonists, stem from classic Greek culture and mythology, which was a main source of inspiration for Enlightenment thinkers in their own drive to understand the universe. Summarized perfectly here, Socrates is being punished unjustly by the authorities for denying the local gods, yet continues teaching even unto his death. This pursuit of knowledge at all costs may have gone too far, though. Mary Shelley articulated these prescient concerns just a few years after the Enlightenment proper in her horror classic Frankenstein, with its lesser-known subtitle, The Modern Prometheus. It wasn't divine punishment for the Doctor, but his/our own doing, like Pattinson. The Enlightenment's scorching, fiery truth that there is nothing greater, leading to the modern nihilistic torment of what Eggers calls our tiresome, lame commercial culture. Dafoe even spells out how the blind will receive divine grace.
The others, still blind, yet in it, seeing the divine gracious.
But those who partake of the
hot Promethean plunder,
the truth, will be forsaken.
Casting them down to Davy Jones.
In my research, the filmmaker he showed the most affinity for was Andrei Tarkovsky, who also explored the theme of spiritual hunger. There's a few lines from Stalker, his last Soviet film, that seem like Eggers could have written them himself. My dear, the world is so unutterably boring. There's no telepathy, no ghosts, no flying saucers. They can't exist. The world is ruled by cast iron laws. In the Middle Ages, life was interesting. Every house had its goblin. Each church had God. Eggers is cagey on his personal beliefs.
Or is there some sort of credibility you give to these folktales?
Okay, one, my personal ontologies are private.
But some insights can be gleaned.
In all my films thus far, the real world and the mythical religious world are one and the same. And I'm sure growing up in a secular society without the sacred and the sublime around, I'm drawn to mythology and religion and folklore and fairy tales and the occult that can contain all that stuff, you know, and then my films are an expression of a longing for that, if I can be so precious. I really are saying I want to believe, and now I'm saying, well, believing leads, you know, but can lead to madness.
Regarding how his 2015 feature The Witch was shot digitally instead of on film to save money.
I mean, I love Emmanuel Lubezki, very inspired by him and his work, but you know, him being really excited about Alexa 65 and saying we've been looking at the world through dirty windows for years, and now we can finally see things clearly. I like the dirty windows.
Which seems to have a double meaning. On the surface, he just prefers the grainy look of film, and likely lots of other little details. But dirty windows also obscure the world, adding inherent mystery. So the Lighthouse, it turns out, is an allegorical horror story of the tension, attempted reconciliation, conflict, and eventual vanquishing of the old world mindset by the enlightened young one, sparking today's existential angst, all possibly without the auteur's conscious intent. At any rate, all your technology, so that people can work less and consume more. They're all crutches, artificial limbs. Mankind exists in order to create works of art. At least that's unselfish compared with all other human activities. I'm envious of medieval craftsmen who are doing the work for God, and that becomes a way to be creative to celebrate something else, because it's not about me, me, me. Eggers would almost certainly say that the Enlightenment was a net positive, but that something important, perhaps even necessary, was lost, and his films are attempts to bring it back, even if just for 2 hours. They let us experience the ontologies of the past vicariously. He and us can flirt with supernatural belief without succumbing, as he says, to madness.